Hello again. This is Chris Lee of Southeastern14.com. I'm here today to preview the 2022 MLB draft as it pertains to the Southeastern Conference Western Division. Lots of players to cover today. In case you're wondering what about the East, we did that last week, so you can find that on our YouTube channel. Lots of ground to cover here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going over the guys that you could see going in the top two rounds, starting with current players on SEC West rosters, and then going to signees, and then from there, going down the rest of the teams to mention some other guys of note that may not go in the first two rounds. So we will do the second part probably in alphabetical order. So don't worry if you are a fan of an SEC team, even if you don't get mentioned at the first, your team is going to be discussed at some point in this broadcast. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the top guys who are going to be taken, I think, in round one or two, which is day one. That starts Sunday. The draft, if you would like to watch it, is on ESPN. The first round starts at 6 Central on Monday night. The second round will be on MLB Network. On Monday, starting at 1 Central, rounds 2 to 10, rather 3 to 10 will take place. You can check that out at MLB.com. And on Tuesday, the draft wraps up with rounds 11 to 20. That also at 1 Central on MLB.com. I'm going to go ahead and start by reviewing some of the top guys currently on SEC rosters that I think you'll see go early. I'm going to pull up MLB.com. I'm going to pull up some of their scouting reports so you can read along with this. Also, you'll notice on the ticker below, I have listed a lot of guys that I think you will see go in the draft. It is not meant to be all-inclusive. We only get 1,000 characters, and there's a lot more players from the SEC, whether they are on the current rosters or commits, whether those be high school or JUCO kids. You're going to see those guys go too. Again, they may not be on the ticker, but that was not an intentional omission. I only had so much room to work with. All right, let's pull up some guys here, and I'm going to start with Jacob Berry at LSU, who is probably going to be the first SEC current player off the board. Jacob Berry, if you followed the SEC, you know this kid is a legit hitter. If you're searching for a weakness as a hitter, good luck to you. This guy is a switch hitter. I think he walked more than he struck out. He's got big power. He's got the hit tool. He's got the power tool. You're going to see Jacob Berry probably go in the first 10 picks. Now, the issue with Jacob Berry is position. He did not field very well at third, played some right. That went a little better, but not great. Jacob Berry has said he's committed to working things out, to playing at first base or third base, I think is where he wants to go first. So he said I'm willing to work at it. But the good news is there's now a universal DH. And so I think because of that, Jacob Berry is kind of a low-risk pick because even if he can't play in the field, he's going to hit well enough to where he's going to play for somebody and maybe play for somebody pretty quickly. Next guy on the list of SEC guys, this is in order that MLB.com has him listed. You may see some variance in opinion other places, but he is 25th on MLB.com's list. That is Connor Prielipp, who threw something like 30 collegiate innings. Prielipp had a pretty good freshman season going for him in 2020. Then the COVID pandemic struck and knocked out all of baseball for the rest of the year. Prielipp was pitching pretty well a year ago for Alabama, had some arm issues with sideline, then had offseason surgery, did not throw a pitch this year. Connor Prielipp is good enough, though, maybe the top college pitching prospect in this draft, even though he didn't throw much at all the last 3 years, really. The slider is considered maybe the best pitch in the draft. I heard Jim Kalis say that earlier this week. The fastball's good. He's got other pitches. Connor Prielipp, regrettably, we did not get to see more at the college baseball level, but he's going to pitch and pitch probably pretty well in the major leagues and is most likely going to be a first-rounder in this year's draft. Okay, moving on to the next guy on MLB.com's list, a guy that I like a lot too, Cayden Wallace at Arkansas. The hit tool is the lowest grade that he gets, but if you watch postseason baseball, Cayden Wallace was just a force in the field. Made big play after big play, The power is there, had a nice offensive season for the Razorbacks. Caden Wallace is only a draft-eligible sophomore, so he's got some leverage, but I am seeing him quite often in that comp round one, and I think picks 31 to 40, somewhere in that range. Surely if Caden Wallace goes there, well, not surely, but likely he will not be back at Arkansas if he is getting picked where I'm hearing. But anyway, Caden Wallace has only played 2 years of ball. He's only 20 years old. He will turn 21 in August, but Caden Wallace has got some leverage, but I think going to get picked in the first round, or maybe the comp first round, and a lot of people think he will go pro from there. Okay, the next guy on the list, and this was kind of a theme in the SEC this year, that was talented and injured pitchers. Actually, he's not the next guy on the list, but I'm going to talk about him anyway right here. In fact, there's 2 injured pitchers I'm going to talk about before I'll talk about the next guy on the list. That's Peyton Pallette at Arkansas, who was probably, along with Prielipp, the top college pitcher coming into the season. Just didn't work out for him. He got hurt, had Tommy John surgery, didn't play this year. And so you'll see, actually, let me pull this back up here so you can see the scouting report on him. Peyton Pallette, very talented kid. Would have been the Razorbacks' ace this year, throws several pitches pretty well. Despite the surgery, I think you will see him go in the top 2 rounds, could slip into the first, but I think I'm mostly seeing him in the competitive balance round or round 2. But Peyton Pallette, the talent is there enough that he's going to get picked pretty highly, it appears. And again, a kid that's got a good shot at a major league career. Now, again, injuries were a theme in the SEC this year to pitchers. You saw a lot of the top arms knocked out, if not for the whole season, then for a lot of it. And the guy whose injury probably changed the trajectory of his team's season more than anybody was Landon Sims. Now, you remember Landon Sims from the end of 2021 in Omaha, where he just dominated and led Mississippi State to a national title. He was that quintessential high-volume, high-leverage reliever with a slider that's outstanding and a fastball that's almost as good. And Sims was working on a changeup. The Bulldogs had moved him to the rotation. He was their Friday night guy and was just lights out his first few starts. Then he had elbow trouble and surgery. And I think it's going to be ready maybe early next spring. But in any case, Landon Sims, we didn't get to see how that starting experiment would have worked out. I think it would have worked out pretty well. He did not get a chance to really show that changeup and show the major league scouts what he could do. That's why he's a second rounder. I'm guessing he would have been a first rounder without the injury. And who knows, still could be. But Landon Sims, a guy that I really like a lot. I don't think there's a lot of downside in drafting this guy because I think that the downside is he's a high leverage late inning reliever that you don't use as much in terms of innings pitched, but you can use in key spots. The upside is if he can learn that changeup and command it and throw it well, then he's a starter and maybe a pretty good one for a big league team. But Landon Sims, a guy that I like a lot, and if my favorite team, the Braves, were to draft him, I'd be totally fine with that. Okay, in that range, a little bit before, another Mississippi State guy, Logan Tanner, the catcher. He's a big kid. He's got some power, not really fast, but that's the case for most catchers. Really got a great arm, just kind of your prototypical big catcher who can hit for power and control the running game. And I think Logan Tanner, you're going to see is probably a solid second-round pick, maybe competitive balance at the end of the first round. The year was not as good this year as the year before, but I think 2021 – Logan Tanner was a kid who not only led a team to a national title, but he barely came off the field. And that's a trait that you like in catchers is durability and being able to control the run game. Catchers often hit for some power. The hit tool, maybe not there as much for Logan Tanner. But again, for catcher, that's not unusual. I think you will see him picked probably on the first day of the draft. Okay, of the current players, the last guy that you were seeing go in that 1 to 2 round range from the SEC West is Cade Doughty, the second baseman at LSU who may play somewhere else. Doty was just kind of a do-it-all guy at LSU. He can hit for power. The grades aren't outstanding, but he does a lot of stuff well. And I think you'll see Cade Doty go probably in the second round. Who knows? Maybe lasting to the third, but he's in that range. Let's talk about commitments that could go in the top 2 rounds. And we left off at LSU, which is a good place to start when you're talking about commitments in the first round. My goodness, LSU has got a bunch of guys. I'm going to pull up Justin Crawford, the top one, and let you look at his scouting report while I'm going through this. If that name is familiar, you may remember his dad, Carl Crawford, who was maybe the best player in Tampa Bay Rays franchise history, multiple time All-Star, had a really good career. I think his kid has got similar tools. But LSU, my goodness, Jay Johnson, their coach, is going to be awfully nervous watching those first few rounds and beyond. He has said he's got 4 to 6 guys that he expects to not see on campus after the draft. I think Crawford would be number one on that list. He is probably the top draftable SEC hitter in terms of commitments. I think it's thought that it's unlikely that he'll get to his campus down in Baton Rouge. The other guy that fits that is Robbie Snelling, who checks in at 16. I think he's moved up the rankings a spot or two just in the last day or two. Snelling is a lefty, again, thought to be a tough guy to get to campus. You got some other guys for the Tigers that are a little further down the list, but also maybe going to be guys that's going to be tough for LSU to get to campus. The next one would probably be Tucker Toman, who checks in at 35 at MLB.com. He's in that range on a lot of other places too. Got good bloodlines. His father is the coach at Middle Tennessee State, which is not far from where I live. Tucker Toman, a kid who could sneak into the first round or go the second round. Brady Neal, a catcher for LSU. He's a little further down the list. I'll pull up his report. He's at 74 on MLB.com. And again, these are prospect rankings. This is not where they think they will go in the draft. And there's sometimes a disconnect between the two. But he's another one, Brady Neal, that I think could see his name called early. Other guys for LSU that you could see called early, Mikey Romero. He's a high school shortstop. And Jacob Misiorowski, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He is a lefty JUCO player, and I've seen him start to pop up into that fringe first-round discussion. You could see a team that wants an underslot deal maybe take him in the first round. Somebody was speculating on that today. I think that was Kiley McDaniel at ESPN. But anyway, that's what, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 LSU guys you could see go just among their commitments in the first 2 rounds. And boy, there's a list of other guys just behind that we will get to later. Okay, having gone through that so far, let's do this. Let's move on to some of the other guys that we'll see. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go down each team alphabetically and just kind of tell you about some of the other draftable prospects on current rosters and also some high school kids of note. So with that, I'm going to go back to MLB.com in a moment and pull up some of these scouting reports maybe as we do this. Let's start with Alabama. We've already talked about Connor Prielipp. You could see shortstop Jim Jarvis drafted. Dylan Ray has got some people that like him. I know Kiley McDaniel at ESPN is very high on Dylan Ray, who was a right-hander in the rotation last year. When you move on to high school kids, Alabama signed a lot of good players this year. I think the one that you have to worry about the most in terms of him getting to campus is Walter Ford. In fact, I probably should have talked about Ford earlier in those first 2-day picks because I think every rating service that I'm seeing has got Ford slotted is around a second-round pick. I've seen him anywhere from 49 to 55. Ford is a kid from Pace High School in Florida who reclassified from 2023. So again, a lot of guy who has got a lot of leverage. There's talk that his fastball one day could hit 100 miles an hour. If he goes to Alabama, he's a potential two-way player. So if you're Alabama, that's the guy that you are most worried about getting through the draft. That's right-hander Walter Ford. I'm going to pull his scouting report up on MLB.com so we can take a look at that for just a minute. There you go. You can see here, just kind of recycling some things I said earlier. Really good fastball. He's got a couple of secondary pitches. So Walter Ford, probably the guy, if you are an Alabama fan, that you're most worried about getting through the draft. Now, Alabama has some other guys who get drafted. Outfielder Max Williams, shortstop Colby Shelton, lefty Alton Davis would be probably the top guys there. And righty Gavin Jones, too, would be one to take a look at. Moving on to Arkansas, the Razorbacks always have some guys that they're worried about getting through the draft, although Arkansas in recent years has done a pretty good job. In fact, a year ago, got two players through the draft in Hagen Smith and Peyton Stovall, guys that could have been first or second rounders, but threw out numbers, I guess, high enough to scare off the majors or withdrew from the draft and went to Arkansas. Big coups for Dave Van Horn a year ago. He'll be watching to try to do the same thing this year. The guys to watch, right-hander Cole Phillips is about a third rounder by most people, maybe a second rounder. Prototypical four-pitch guy, had Tommy John surgery in April. I think that's the thing that's the wild card with him. But as you guys know from watching the draft, that doesn't seem to bother teams that much anymore. And so he's a guy that I think you could see go potentially in the second round if the right team likes him at that spot and the money is right. Mason Neville, a guy that's probably going to be a fourth or fifth rounder according to the projections. Again, just because you're ranked in a certain spot doesn't mean you go there. But in terms of guys who were dangerous to get picked for the draft, I think him and third baseman Jason Jones are guys to watch out. The Razorbacks also have a couple of interesting JUCO commits and shortstop Harold Call and Cody Adcock, a right-hander. They are ranked among the top 50 college prospects at Perfect Game in the JUCO grouping, and so those are guys you could see go as well. In terms of current players, Arkansas has got several guys. We talked about Cayden Wallace and Peyton Pallette. Robert Moore, the second baseman, a kid who's got some leverage. I think he's technically with COVID got 2 years left. He could go second, third, fourth round potentially. Of course, his dad is Dayton Moore, who's the GM of the Royals. Jalen Battles, their shortstop, I think you'll see go in those top 10 rounds. Just a defensive whiz, and the bat got a little better last year. Brady Slavin's a guy that was hitting in the heart of the order for the Razorbacks the last 2 years. Slavins is probably a late second day, maybe early third day guy. Probably a better college player than a pro prospect, but certainly a guy who should get drafted. Baseball America had him ranked in the top 250 draftable prospects. ESPN had him not far behind. In terms of pitching, Zach Morris, the lefty, and Connor Nolan, the right-hander, who threw so well in the postseason, are guys you could see go also. Let's move on to Auburn, and we will start with current Auburn players, a lot of whom really did a lot, I think, to up their stocks with their postseason performance. And that group of guys that did that are mostly pitchers. Of course, the guy that when you talk about Auburn, you've got to start with Sonny DiChiara. He was the SEC Player of the Year. You see him ranked right in that 150 to 200 range by a lot of people. So Sonny DiChiara probably going to be a day 2 pick. And then you get to a bunch of pitchers. And this is where you've got some guys, if they don't get picked where maybe they're hoping, you can see some guys come back and really improve their stock potentially with the senior year. Blake Burkhalter, the guy that I think caught everybody's eye the most in the postseason. You're seeing him on a lot of draft rankings. Their closer who finished the season so well. He's a junior, so he's got a little bit of leverage. Same thing with Mason Barnett and Trace Bright. Those are two guys that I think you can probably see picked on day 2. But if the money's not right, then those are two guys that can come back, have some leverage, and maybe get better and get picked higher the next year. Moving on to high school kids with Auburn, Ike Irish, their catcher, is probably considered a better college player than pro prospect. Got a really good arm. He's a catcher that if Auburn can get him to campus, can be a difference maker, I think, pretty quickly. Auburn's got some other prospects. Zach Crotchfeld, a lefty. is a guy that could easily go in day one. The projections on him are all over the board. Chris Stanfield, most people consider a top 200 prospect. Hayden Murphy, a right-hander, right in that range too. Got a mid-90s fastball already. So those are the guys if you're Auburn, and there's some other guys too, but those are the ones that you're most worried about getting through the draft. Moving on to the JUCO kids, Jiron Long and Tanner Ballman, a righty and lefty respectively, are guys to watch who could get picked. And Carter Wright, a JUCO kid who's top 100 in perfect games, JUCO player rankings, is also a guy maybe to watch. Okay, LSU. Jay Johnson, my goodness. If there's a coach in the country with more variables on his roster right now as it pertains to the draft than Jay Johnson, I don't know who that is, because you've got a bunch of guys off the roster who could get picked or not get picked. You've got a bunch of high school kids who could get picked high or put out a number that's too big for the scouts to want to pay and the organizations to want to pay. And then you could get some guys to campus unexpectedly that way. JUCO guys, LSU's got a few of those. Transfers, LSU's gotten several of those already. So you probably got a better chance of hitting the lottery than you do projecting what LSU's 35-man roster is going to look like next year. Okay, we have gone through the names at the top of the list: Crawford, Snelling, Toman, Romero. I don't remember if we went through Gavin Guidry or not. We may not have. He's a kid who could be a second rounder, but Kylie McDaniel says is a tough sign. Another guy in that range we have not talked about is Jaden Newt, a right-hander. And he's a guy that, again, second round potential, but a tough sign. He may get to campus just because of that. I think we talked about Brady Neal. He's a catcher. That may be a tough one for LSU to get to campus based on what I've read. Then you've got some other guys. You've got Michael Kennedy, the lefty, who's probably a top 5 round pick based on talent. Not hearing much about him one way or the other. You've got Paxton Kling, an outfielder, who was a top 25 player nationally by perfect game. He's pulled out of the draft. So that's good news if you're LSU. That's one of your high school studs that you are going to get to campus. Chase Shore's a guy with mixed reviews. Some services like him better than others. Perfect Game also has him as a top 25 prospect in the country. And then you've got some other guys. We talked about Jared Jones briefly earlier, I think. Ethan Fry, Micah Buckman, Adrian Moffitt, guys who are roughly 250, top 250 high school kids who LSU could get to campus. I'm not seeing them pop up as much in draft projections, especially Moffitt. Fry and Buckman are risks probably, but they're a little further down the list than a lot of these other guys we have talked about. LSU's also got several top JUCO kids. Adrian Servano and Caleb Appleby are both right-handers who ranked in the top 5 prospects in JUCO by perfect game. And there's a lefty here, Nate Ackenhusen, I think is how you pronounce it, who's a top 40 prospect at perfect game. Not seeing his name pop up as much in drafts, but that's one that you could see maybe at LSU. So LSU is just going to be watching in every direction between its commits, its players, and its JUCO commits as well to see where those guys are going to wind up. Let's hit a few more guys. We've got some other teams to cover before we end today. Mississippi State, 2021 national champion. We've talked about Tanner and Sims. You could see Brad Cumbest and Cameron James go. There are other kids off that team that could get drafted, but those guys are popping up on draft lists. There's a commit we didn't get to earlier, and I should have done that with the first rounders. That is shortstop Jett Williams, based on what I have heard people say. It seems like he's going to be a tough one for the Bulldogs to get to campus. I'm going to go back to the MLB.com screen, pull him up, because I think he is in their top 15 or close to it. He's down at 21, but Jett Williams, a kid that I think, based on the mock drafts I'm seeing, State's probably going to have a pretty tough time getting him to campus. And let me pull that screen back up. There you go. You can see a little bit of the scouting report here on him from MLB.com. Okay, other guys that you're worried about if you're Mississippi State. Dakota Lofton, who's an outfielder, Ross Highfield, who's a catcher. Now, the good news, if you are Mississippi State, and this doesn't mean that they're coming, but you've got Lofton, Jordan, and Highfield all on campus right now, according to Steve Robertson of 24/7. You've also got Cody Holcomb, a JUCO kid who was the number 11 prospect at Perfect Game in the JUCO class, also on campus, according to Steve Robertson. You've got Nathan Williams and Ernie Day, who are highly rated JUCO kids. I'm not seeing them come up as much in the draft, maybe, but those are guys based on their rankings as JUCO prospects that you probably want to watch. Then you've got the guy that I think is one of the more interesting players potentially in this draft. He's ranked better as a prospect for college than he is right now as a draftable prospect. And I'm probably going to botch this name, but it's Durangelo. I'm going to say Ciente. I've never seen a last name spelled like this. CJINTJE, I believe it is. He is, this is not a misprint. He is a both-handed pitcher and apparently throws about 90 with both arms. So he's a kid that if you can get to campus in your state, that's a big win for you. And it seems like they've maybe got a shot to do that. All right, let's move on to Ole Miss, your defending national champion. Ole Miss is going to have some guys drafted, but they're probably not going to be first and second round picks, at least in terms of their current roster. The top draftable prospect, and he had a little bit of a down year, but I still like him, and I think the scouts do too. That's Hayden Dunhurst. He is listed at 147, I believe it is, right in that range, or he was. They've shifted the rankings and moved him down a little bit. You can see the scouting report on Hayden Dunhurst. You probably know it already if you've watched SEC baseball, but Dunhurst is probably a defense-first catcher where the bat lags a little bit, but that's not really terribly out of the norm for college catchers. And so Hayden Dunhurst, a guy that I think you're going to see get picked probably on day 2 and should have a chance to stick based on defense. Other guys for Ole Miss that I think you could see their names called from the current roster, you've got Derek Diamond, who is a very talented pitcher. Diamond is a guy who threw a lot of strikes, but never really could pitch effectively for any length of time. So he may be a guy that the pros like better than the performance in college would indicate because he's got pretty good stuff. Dylan DeLucia was the MVP of the College World Series last year, pitched really well. I think he helped his draft stock based on his performance in the postseason, and I think he could be a day 2 guy who sees his name called then. TJ McCants, this is maybe the wild card for Ole Miss. He's athletic. He's played center field before. I think he's very talented. He's a draft-eligible sophomore, and I think he's a guy that could easily see his name called on day 2 for an organization that really likes him. A little further down the list, Kevin Graham, an outfielder who was hurt a good bit of last year, but just a solid hitter for Ole Miss throughout most of his career. I think he'll probably be a day 3 guy. And then Tim Elko. Elko, I think, is probably going to get picked somewhere just because he was so good as a college player. Just a really good clubhouse guy. That's not going to be till day 3 if he gets picked, but I'm rooting for Tim Elko to get picked for sure. Okay, now Ole Miss has got a couple of guys that I probably should have talked about off the top who are going to be guys that are going to be tough to get to campus. But Jackson Ferris, a lefty, he is a top 10 player in his class, according to Perfect Game. Most services have him as a first-round talent. He's thought to be a tough sign, so that's one that Ole Miss is going to be watching very nervously along with Roman Anthony. He's an outfielder from Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. Another guy who may be a tough sign, but he's a guy who could come in and help Ole Miss, I think, immediately. Another guy a little further down the list, Grayson Saunier, a right-handed high school player. Nick Suss of the Clarion Ledger has called him a college lean. So that's a guy that's projected as a day 2 pick that you could see not get his name called if the number is not what the MLB teams want. So he's a guy to watch. TJ Quinn, another right-hander, probably a guy in terms of prospect status right in that range. And James Smith, a guy, a high school shortstop that you could see get drafted too. Okay, moving on to Texas A&M. Not as much to talk about with the Aggies as compared to the other teams. In terms of what's left on the roster right now, A&M was a very old team this year. And with that, a lot of times old guys don't get drafted as high. The guys that I think you'll see go off the board, and this is probably going to be day 2 or 3, Micah Dallas, a right-handed pitcher who did not throw as well this year, and Dylan Rock, an outfielder who had a tremendous season. I think he's going to be 24 years old at the draft or not long after it. He's probably a day 3 guy as well just because of the age. Dallas will be interesting because Dallas had a better year as a sophomore at Texas Tech than he did as a junior at A&M, although he pitched well at times in the College World Series. He's that quintessential guy who might bet on himself and say, I'm going to come back, pitch better as a senior, try to do better in the draft next year. So that, I think, in my mind, the most interesting name to watch in terms of the guys on the roster at Texas A&M last season. Further down the list, really, Jim Schlossnagle has hit the JUCO ranks pretty hard. Their best draft prospects may be JUCO kids, middle infielder Stanley Tucker. You got a few pitchers in there, several right-handers. J.D. Gregson is a catcher to watch too. He's rated in the top 100 JUCO players according to Perfect Game. Evan Godwin, a lefty, right there also in the top 100. Dylan Janak, a righty, ranked inside the top 25. So I think most of their guys, in terms of their recruiting class, more JUCO heavy with top players maybe than it is with high school players, or maybe close to even. But I'm not seeing a lot of A&M guys register on draft radars pretty high from what I've seen. The high school kid to watch is Jace LaViolette, high school outfielder. He's ranked inside the top 150 by Perfect Game in terms of high school players. I think he is their highest rated recruit. You're seeing him rated in that day 2 range, right around, say, 220 to 280. So that would be what? Roughly, I don't know, 8th, 9th round pick. So you could see his name called in there. But again, like a lot of high school kids in that range, is the money right? Can an organization make it worth my while to skip college and come to school? That's all I've got for the draft today. Again, there's going to be players that I didn't talk about that'll get drafted, but we've done 32 minutes of this already. So I think I've hit all the high points. Hope you liked the video. We will have some post-draft coverage, maybe coming every day after the draft, just to fill you in on who got taken as it pertains to the SEC, who's left. May do some things at the website too at southeastern14.com. But anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and we will see you again next week.